Growing up, it was just me and Dad. After Mom died when I was little, Dad took the reins, tight. He meant well, but his idea of raising me involved a lot of rules and lectures. I always felt like I was suffocating under his constant watch. So, the day I graduated high school, I was out. I headed straight to college on a full ride, courtesy of my knack for numbers and hard work. College was my breath of fresh air. I was on my own, making my own rules. I studied accounting, worked my tail off, and landed a job at a firm as an assistant while still in school. By the time I graduated, they bumped me up to a full accountant, handling major accounts like I was born for it. 2 years later, life threw me a curveball named Eric. Met him through friends at one of those gatherings I usually avoided but felt like crashing that night. Eric was different, easygoing, and laughed a lot. He didn't come with that heavy vibe some guys did, trying to pin you down and map your whole life out in front of you. We hit it off, talking about everything from old-school hip-hop to our mutual disdain for overcooked pasta. It wasn't long before we started dating. He was a breath of fresh air, making me laugh and actually listening to what I had to say. It felt like a partnership, which I hadn't realized I was missing. Eric talked a lot about how he dreamed of making music, and even played the guitar for me. One evening, lounging at his place, Eric casually said, holding the guitar in your hands, "Carly, I think it's time you met my folks. They've been nagging me about meeting the girl who's got my attention." I froze a bit at that. "Meet your parents, huh? That sounds serious." He chuckled. "Nah, it's cool. They're chill. Not like your old man, I promise." We went for dinner at his parents' house the following weekend. I was on edge, expecting the third degree, but it was nothing like that. His mom was sweet, and his dad was this laid-back guy who joked more than he talked. No interrogations, just good food and a lot of laughs. They seemed genuinely nice, not trying to pry or dictate anything. It was so different from the life I knew with Dad. They didn't even flinch when I talked about my job and how I liked living life on my terms. After a few months, things with Eric got serious, and before I knew it, he popped the question. We got married in a small ceremony, just us and a few close friends. I didn't invite Dad. I couldn't deal with his scrutiny, not on that day. It was modest, perfect, and just what we wanted. No fuss, no drama. Driving back from the courthouse, Eric grabbed my hand and squeezed. "So, Mrs. Carly Phillips, how's it feel to be stuck with me?" I laughed, squeezing his hand back. "Not stuck, partner. Feels like we're in this together. Just keep it real with me, okay?" "Always," he promised, and that was enough for me. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just escaping something, but actually running towards something great. The first few months of marriage were like living in a dream. Eric and I were a team, tackling everything from late-night work deadlines to weekend grocery runs. But as time passed, something shifted. It wasn't overnight, but the changes crept in slow and steady, like shadows at dusk. It started small. Eric began making comments about how often I was out with friends after work. One night, as I was getting ready to meet Jenny for dinner, he dropped onto the couch, his brow furrowed. "Another night out, Carly? You've seen Jenny more this week than you've seen me," he muttered, not looking at me. I paused, mascara wand in hand. "It's just dinner, Eric. We've both been busy, and it's been ages since we caught up." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I get it. It's just, I miss us, you know? Maybe you could skip this one?" I felt a tug in my chest. He looked genuinely upset. "Okay, sure. I'll call her and cancel. We can grab some dinner together?" Eric's face lit up. "Perfect. Let's try that new Thai place around the corner." That night felt like a win, like we were back on track. But the cancellations became a regular thing. My friends started to drift. Conversations with Jenny became a series of rain checks and eventually fizzled out. Then came the comments about my job. As an accountant, sometimes you had to put in the extra hours, especially during the end-of-quarter crunch. One evening, I was wrapping up a call with a client when Eric walked into the home office, an annoyed look plastered across his face. "On the phone again, Carly? Who was that, anyway?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Just a client, we had to finalize some reports. You know how it is," I replied, shutting down my laptop. Eric shook his head. "I don't know, it feels like your job's always creeping into our time. I'm just thinking about us, about what's best for us. Isn't that worth considering?" It felt wrong, the way he said it, like he was deciding what was best for me. But I nodded, not wanting to argue. "I'll see what I can do," I said, even though every part of me screamed that it wasn't right. The final straw came when he insisted on joining our bank accounts. "It'll be easier to manage everything together," he argued one night at dinner. "But I like handling my own finances," I countered, trying to keep my voice calm. Eric slammed his fork down, his eyes narrowing. "So what? You don't trust me now? Is that it?" After that, things just weren't the same. The man I married, who talked about partnership and equality, seemed like a stranger. The balance we had was gone, replaced by his rules and his plans. I found myself fading into the background of my own life, my voice getting quieter as his got louder. Life started to feel tighter, like the walls were closing in on me, especially when it came to dealing with Eric's parents. They lived just a few blocks away, which at first seemed convenient, but soon enough, it felt like a trap. One Saturday morning, Eric casually mentioned, "Carly, Mom and Dad need help with their garden this weekend. We should go over and give them a hand." It wasn't a question, more like a given. "Sure, I guess," I replied, not really up for spending my day off digging in the dirt, but willing to keep the peace. We spent the entire day there, me pulling weeds and him chatting with his dad about the latest football game. As the sun set, and I wiped the sweat from my brow, his mom, Linda, called us in for dinner. "You're a lifesaver, Carly," Linda said, handing me a plate piled high with food. "I don't know what we'd do without you two." "It's no problem, Linda," I said, forcing a smile. The truth was, I minded a lot. As dinner progressed, Eric and his dad were deep in conversation about some trip they were planning. Fishing, beers, the works. I tried to chime in. "Sounds like fun, maybe I can join." Eric cut me off. "Nah, it's a guy's thing. You wouldn't enjoy it." Linda chimed in, nodding. "And besides, I could really use your help that weekend. The attic needs clearing out, and it's just too much for me." I felt a lump in my throat. "Sure, Linda. I'll be here." It wasn't long before Linda considered it okay to call me up at work. One busy afternoon, my phone buzzed, and her name flashed on the screen. I hesitated but answered. "Hey Linda, what's up?" "Carly, I need you to stop by the store on your way home. We're out of a few things," she said, her tone assuming I'd just say yes. I was in the middle of something important, and frustration bubbled up. "Linda, I'm really busy." "It'll have to wait." There was a silence on the line, then a cold, "Oh, okay then. We'll figure something out." Hanging up felt like a small victory, but the guilt gnawed at me. It was always like this, trapped between what I wanted and what they expected of me. That night, over dinner, Eric brought it up. "Mom mentioned you couldn't help out today. Everything okay?" "Yeah, just busy. You know how it is," I replied, poking at my food. "Right, but you know how much they rely on us. Maybe just try and be a bit more helpful, huh?" His tone was light, but the implication was heavy. I nodded, a tight smile on my face, feeling the weight of their expectations. It was becoming clearer that my freedom was slipping through my fingers, and I was letting it happen, one favor at a time. When my boss called me into his office one chilly Wednesday morning, I had no idea it would be a turning point. As I stepped in, he was all smiles. "Have a seat, Carly," he motioned to the chair across from his desk. "I wanted to talk to you about your progress." You've been nailing it, consistently outperforming expectations. I relaxed a bit, feeling a spark of pride. Thanks. I do my best. And it shows. Which is why we want to offer you the position of senior accountant. It comes with a decent raise and more responsibility. What do you say? The words hit me like a wave of fresh air. Absolutely, I'm in, I replied without hesitation. Great. I knew you'd be the right fit. Congratulations. He extended his hand across the desk, and I shook it, a grin spreading across my face. Walking back to my desk, I felt lighter than I had in months. This was exactly what I needed, a win. I couldn't wait to tell Eric, thinking he'd be thrilled for me. I got a promotion at work today, I said as casually as I could, trying to read his expression when I walked through the door. That's great, babe. Eric's smile seemed genuine at first, but then he dropped a bomb. You know what? This means I can finally quit my job and focus on my music. I paused, a spoon halfway to my mouth. Quit your job? But how will we manage until your music takes off? He shrugged, almost too casually. With your raise, we'll be fine. You can cover for both of us, can't you? His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't a discussion, more like a decision he'd already made. I nodded, not knowing what else to say. One evening, coming home late and tired, I found Eric and his parents in the living room, laughing over some old family photos. His mother waved me over, her voice too cheerful. Dear, now that you're here, could you help clean up the kitchen? We made a bit of a mess baking. I looked at the clock, it was almost 9. Actually, I'm really tired tonight. Maybe Eric can help? Eric looked at me, then back to his parents, an awkward silence filling the room. His mother's face tightened. Oh, I wouldn't dream of making him work now. He's been so busy today. And you know, a wife helps her family. I bit back a sharper reply, nodding slowly. This wasn't the first time, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. I went into the kitchen and started cleaning up, the noise from the living room a stark contrast to my growing frustration. The day started like any other until my phone rang. It was Aunt Lisa, her voice shaking. Honey, it's about your dad. He's passed away. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. What? When? How? The questions spilled out, but I wasn't ready for any answers. Last night, in his sleep, Aunt Lisa said softly. You need to come home. I sat frozen on the edge of our bed, the room spinning around me. My father and I hadn't spoken in years, not since I'd left home, vowing never to live under another person's thumb. Now, I'd never get the chance to fix that. I wiped away the tears and found Eric in the living room, his eyes glued to the TV. Eric, my dad died. I need to go back home for the funeral. I need you to come with me. My voice broke with each word. He barely looked away from his game. Babe, that's tough. But I've got a big recording session lined up. Can't you handle this one? I stared at him, stunned. Handle this one? Eric, my dad died. I thought you'd want to be there, for me. He sighed, pausing his game as if it were a huge inconvenience. Look, I'm really busy right now. Plus, you and your dad weren't even close. You've got this, okay? I was too numb to argue. I packed a bag and drove alone to my childhood home, the silence of the car echoing the emptiness I felt inside. The small house looked just as I remembered, the memories flooding back as I stepped inside. Aunt Lisa met me at the door, her eyes red from crying. We hugged, and she whispered, "He always hoped you'd come back." After the funeral, Aunt Lisa handed me an envelope. "He left this for you," she said. Inside was the deed to the house and a bank statement showing a balance of $200,000. Tears streamed down my face as I read the note attached. For my daughter, Carly, who deserves the world. I'm sorry for everything. Dad. Sitting in my old room, I pulled out a box of childhood photos. Pictures of me in punk rock tees, with bright red hair, looking defiant. I remembered how much I wanted to escape this life, to be free. And now, here I was, feeling trapped all over again in a different way. I realized then that my youthful rebellion wasn't just against my dad, it was against any life that didn't let me be myself. And somehow, I'd fallen into the same pattern with Eric. Holding Dad's favorite mug, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. This was it. This was the moment I needed to decide my future. I planned my words carefully for when I returned. Eric needed to understand that things had to change. If not, I'd have to find the courage to move on, using the legacy my father left me to reclaim the independence I'd lost. The moment I stepped through the door, the questions started firing from all sides. "So, how much did your old man leave you?" Eric asked, almost before I could set my bag down. His eyes were eager, not the least bit sympathetic about my father's passing. I hesitated, clutching the envelope a little tighter. It's not important right now." But Eric wasn't having any of that. He moved closer, his hand reaching out. "Come on, we're family here. You can tell us." Before I knew it, he had snatched the envelope from my grasp and ripped it open. His eyes scanned the contents quickly, and a grin spread across his face. 200,000. Can you believe it? His parents, who had been hovering in the background, came closer, their expressions lighting up with the news. It wasn't long before they started making plans. "We should finally take that trip to Italy, all of us," his mother suggested, clapping her hands excitedly. "And we need new living room furniture," his dad chimed in, eyeing the old couch as if it had suddenly become more ragged. Eric was already on his phone, browsing for cars. "I'm getting a new car. Been waiting too long for something like this." I stood there, watching as they planned to spend my inheritance, my father's final gift to me, as if I were just a bystander in their lives. It was surreal, watching them argue over details, ignoring me completely. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "It's my money." I raised my voice, louder than I had intended, my heart pounding in my chest. "It's not ours. It's mine. And I decide how to spend it." The room went quiet. Eric looked up from his phone, his expression darkening. "Your money? Really? Since when did you start thinking it's all about you? Without us, you'd have nothing." His words stung, but before I could reply, his mother grabbed me by the shoulders, her grip tight. "You're being very selfish, you know that? Maybe you need some time to think about how you treat this family." And with that, she shoved me towards the door. I stumbled, catching myself before I could fall, my mind reeling from the shock. "You need to learn your place," she hissed as she slammed the door behind me. Outside, the cool air hit my face, and for a moment, I just stood there, unable to move, unable to believe what had just happened. Then, a laugh escaped my lips, growing louder and more confident. I wasn't sad or even angry anymore. I felt free, completely and utterly free. As I walked away from the house, the weight of the years seemed to lift off my shoulders. I had money, my father's house, and a whole world to explore on my terms. They could keep their plans and their petty demands. I was done making myself small for others. That night, as I settled into the quiet of my father's house, sipping tea from his old mug, I made a list of all the things I wanted to do, places to see, dreams to pursue. It was going to be my new start, my way. For the first couple of weeks, my new life was blissfully quiet. That was until my phone started exploding with calls. At first, I ignored the constant buzzing. It was Eric, and I knew what he wanted. But eventually, his persistence wore me down, and I answered. Eric barked the moment I picked up. "I can't access the accounts anymore." "What the hell, Carly, are you trying to starve us?" I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bitter. "No, Eric. I just decided it's time I managed my own money. You know, since it is mine." His response was a string of expletives before I hung up, ending the conversation on my terms for once. That evening wasn't quiet for long. Eric and his parents showed up at my doorstep, their faces twisted in anger. "You think you can just forget about us?" he shouted as soon as I opened the door. Actually, yes, I can, I said calmly, a stack of papers in my hand. Here are the divorce papers. You can sign them now. The shock on his face was almost comical. He hesitated for a moment but then grabbed the pen with a greedy smile. Fine, I'll sign. But remember, I'm entitled to half of everything. That's $100,000 from your inheritance. His mother, who'd been muttering under her breath, piped up. We should have had all of it. But half is better than none. I couldn't hold back a smirk. Actually, you might want to check the law again. Inheritance isn't divided in a divorce here. You get nothing. The color drained from their faces. Eric's voice was a mix of panic and fury. What are you talking about? We've already spent that money. We thought we'd have it by now. His dad, always one to chime in, added, we're on the hook for loans we took out for the vacation. That's not my problem, I said, stepping back from the doorway. You need to leave now, or I'll call the police. Their threats and protests turned to desperate pleas as they realized I wasn't going to back down. But I was done being manipulated, done being used. Later, I brewed some coffee and sat on the porch, the morning air crisp and cool. It was here, in this quiet moment, that I truly felt the weight of my decisions lifting off my shoulders. I was free, finally free to make my own choices without anyone second-guessing or overriding me. As I sipped my coffee, my neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, walked by with her dog. She waved, a friendly smile on her face. Good morning, Carly. Saw you moving back in. Everything all right? I smiled back, nodding. Morning, Mrs. Dalton. Yes, everything's more than all right. Just needed a change, you know? She chuckled, patting her dog's head. Change is good, dear. Keeps life interesting. If you need anything, just holler. Thank you, I appreciate that. I woke up early that morning, the first rays of sunlight streaming through the window, painting streaks of gold across the floor. It had been months since I moved back into my father's house, months since I had taken control of my life. As I made my coffee, I thought about the day ahead. I had recently been promoted to deputy director at the firm. It was a big step up, the kind that came with new challenges and more responsibilities. But I was ready for it, more than ever. My phone buzzed, breaking the tranquility of the morning. It was Eric, again. Despite everything, he was persistent, always trying to weasel his way back into my life. Hey, Carly, his voice crackled through the speaker, laced with a feigned warmth I knew all too well. I'm busy, Eric. What do you want? I didn't have time for pleasantries. Just wanted to talk, see how you're doing, he replied, trying to sound casual. I'm doing great, better than ever actually, I said firmly, wanting to make it clear that his absence was a large part of my happiness. That's good, that's good. Listen, I was thinking maybe we could meet up, you know, catch up properly? I sighed, the annoyance clear in my breath. Eric, there's nothing left to say. You need to move on, just like I have. There was a pause on the line, a moment of silence as he processed my words. You know, I really am sorry for everything. I've changed. People don't change that quickly, Eric. And I've moved on. Goodbye. I hung up without waiting for a reply, feeling a surge of control. Since the divorce, Eric and his parents had spiraled downward. They had sold their house to cover debts, but it wasn't enough. Now, they lived crammed in a small rented apartment, chased by creditors they couldn't evade. Each attempt Eric made to pull me back into that chaos only strengthened my resolve to push forward on my own path. At work, I threw myself into my new role. My team was dynamic and supportive, responding well to my leadership style. We were currently navigating through a complex merger that tested all our skills. As the day wound down, I left the office feeling accomplished and headed home. The house welcomed me with its familiar warmth and comfort. That evening, I decided to treat myself to a nice dinner out. At the restaurant, I enjoyed a quiet table by the window, a good book in hand. Midway through my meal, I couldn't help but overhear a conversation at the next table. A couple was deep in discussion about the difficulties of managing family expectations in a marriage. I listened, a rueful smile playing on my lips. How well I understood that. Driving home later, the streets quiet and the night sky clear, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My life was entirely my own now. I had fought hard for this independence, and I would continue to protect it at all costs.